So now let's take some of the things that we've learned, specifically classes and extending your classes, and let's go ahead and do a practical example of how you might do something with the class extension. And let's go ahead and set up our own custom weapon. This is really simple to do. What we're going to do for this example case is just base something off of the existing rocket launcher. But what we can do is take we'll just sort of merge two weapons together, and we'll take the particle effects from the shock rifle and the weapon itself from the rocket launcher, and we'll kind of merge those together, and then we'll change the dynamics or the processing of the actual projectile to bounce off of the walls. So basically we'll get a ricochet rocket out of it. Pretty small amount of script required to do an example like this, which is a really good case, an example for why class extension is so powerful. So let's go ahead and set that up right now. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and add a couple of new classes to our project here. One of them is going to be the weapon itself, which we're going to extend off of the rocket launcher, and then the other is going to be a new projectile class, which will be our custom rocket that will look more like the shock rifle particle effect. So what I'm going to do is right-click on the classes folder here under our custom project and add a new item. There is this UT3 weapon template which will automatically stub in an INI file for you with some tunable values, as well as a localization file. For this example, though, I'm just going to use a regular UnrealScript class. But I am going to follow the naming convention of the weapons, and so what we're going to do is call this UTWEP underscore, and we're going to call this Plasma Rocket Launcher. Alright, and then we'll go ahead and add that file. So you can see we have our new file over here in the solution, and it's set it up to, by default, to extend off of the object class, which is kind of the default for that template. So what we're going to go ahead and do is update this now to extend off of UTWEP Rocket Launcher. And you'll see the IntelliSense here is already helping us out. And what we're going to do is we're going to extend off of the rocket launcher content. And we'll open this up really quick. Right-click anywhere in this class and go to definition. One of the great things about the infringe is the way you can jump around. In addition to the IntelliSense, is the kind of the typical Visual Studio functions like that are supported. So the UT Rocket Launcher content class is basically it's just the default settings for what people or what you'll see as the rocket launcher in the game. The rocket launcher itself is a separate, it's standalone class, and the content just kind of is a simple extension of that class that allows them to set all of the default parameters for it. So by us extending off of rocket launcher content instead of the rocket launcher itself, we don't have to go through and set all of this stuff up, to mirror the behavior of the rocket launcher. As you can see, there's a lot of variables here that are being set. Some of them also are, obviously tuned to some pretty specific values here that would be a lot of copy and paste or a lot of trial and error. So it's just not really necessary and not really getting the benefit out of the class extension. Because all we really want to do in this case is we want to override a few things like what ammo it uses and things like particle effects and things of that nature, maybe speed. So we can kind of selectively choose what properties we want to override without having to override everything by extending this, which basically just gives us all these default settings automatically. So bounce back over to our new class here and drag this over in front. So we've already got our extension of the way we want it. And so for the actual rocket launcher, all we really need to do is tell it to use a different projectile class. So what we're going to do is we're going to override the weapon projectiles, and we're going to set this equal to the class, and I'm going to go ahead and type this in. This is going to be the class that we're going to create here, so I'm just getting a little ahead of us here for the example. So we're going to make a plasma rocket class, and I know that the current rocket launcher, I believe it defaults its weapon or its ammo count to 8 or 9. Yeah, 9. So for our example, let's go ahead and bump that up. So ammo count, we're just going to set that. We'll just double it. Go 18. Okay. Now that we've got our simple rocket launcher class right now, it's a fully functioning, class in itself. It's not really changing anything from the rocket launcher, the base rocket launcher in the UDK, or Unreal Tournament as the weapons featured in. But we have told it to use a different projectile class, so now we need to go create that class. And if you ever are setting up your new class, like in this case you want to extend something to weapons, you can just look in the UT game folder and then classes, and there's a lot in here, but you can find kind of what the convention is. So in this case, I'm kind of going off of, you see there are some UT weapon classes, but those are more things like the lockers and the actual pickup factory. The weapons themselves, they've gone with the UT web convention. So that's what I was following when we created this class name right here. So let's go ahead and scroll back up to our classes section, and let's go ahead and add another new item. And this one, following the convention that we just were looking at down there, we're going to call this UT Proj for projectile, and we'll call this Plasma Rocket, which is what we told the new rocket launcher, Plasma Rocket Launcher class we were going to be looking for. So that's what we're giving it right here. Alright, so we've got this new class here. Now this one we want to also extend off of we want to change as few things as possible. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and extend it off of the default rocket class right here. So UT Proj Rocket. So here's where the majority of the changes we're going to make are going to be. But what I want to do really quickly is go ahead and actually take a moment here and run the game to show you what we've done. Because right now, since we've extended this, and even though we told our new rocket launcher essentially class to use a new type of ammo, because we've done the ammo here, but we haven't changed anything since extending off of rocket, I'm just going to jump into the game real quick and show you that this new plasma rocket launcher will be available in the game, but it will behave just like the rocket launcher you'd expect to see. So I'm going to go ahead and build this, and then we'll jump into game. Okay, so now that we've built our scripts with the new files that we added for the weapon, we're going to go ahead and demonstrate it here in the editor. So we're going to open up the foliage map. This is a map that comes with UDK 2010-11 November, and this is a really great looking map. Kind of shows off some of the power of the renderer, as well as a lot of the new visual kind of functionality and the speed tree and everything else like that. So it's a really cool map. What I've done is I've gone in here and updated the player start to be over on this side of the map. It was starting out through the structures there. So what I've done is add that player start, or move that player start, and then also added this object right here, which is just a UT weapon factory. So if you want to drop one of those in, if you open up the content browser, go to actor classes. If you have show categories checked, you're going to go down to pickups, weapon, UT weapon factory. And then with that selected, you can close that. Just right click and add weapon factory here. And you'll have what we placed here. And if you double click on this or select it and then hit F4 to open the properties, you're going to see the very top set of properties here is for the factory itself, and you're choosing the pickup class. And you can see that the plasma rocket launcher, which is the new class that we just created, is an entry in here now. So with that selected, I'm just going to go ahead and run the map really quickly. Okay, so here we are running in the level now. This is the foliage map, as I mentioned, and we're starting the new player start. So I walk over this hill here and look here, you're going to see the factory, and you notice it is using the rocket launcher mesh, which is expected. So actually everything about this should behave just like the rocket launcher. So if we use the primary fire, we fire a rocket as expected, blows up on impact. So basically this is just a rocket launcher, right? But what's different is that this is actually our new class that is set up to allow us to modify it as we see fit, and then we'll see those changes, but we can reuse the same mesh in this case since the rocket launcher looks good. So okay, so let's bounce back over to Visual Studio and let's start making some changes to the projectile. And we're going to go ahead and set that up to bounce off of walls and also use a different particle effect to distinguish it. Okay, so now that we know that our new class is functional and usable in the editor and placeable in a map, and it's using our new projectile class, we know that basically, for the terms of the rocket launcher itself, we're kind of done with that because the remainder of the changes that we want to make are to the projectile. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the plasma rocket class, which we haven't changed it at all. Right now, it's just behaving as you would expect, it is just a rocket. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and go to definition so that we can look at some of the stuff that's in here that we're going to want to override. So one thing that we know for sure that we want to do is change the look of the particles. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these two, the projectile flight template and the explosion template. Just copy those lines and take them over to let's go ahead and move this over here and close this file. Okay, so in the default properties of our projectile class, I'm going to go ahead and paste those in. And I think a couple other things that we would like to change here is the light class that they use. This is going to be as the projectile travels through the air, it emits an actual light from it, creates a light source. So we're going to override that. We won't worry about the explosion, although you definitely could if you wanted to. But for this case, I think we'll just do that there. All right, so what we're going to do is go ahead and change the class here to be what they use for the shock rifle combo. So we want the UT, this is still from UT game, and we want shock. All right, so this is going to be the class that they use for the shock ball, which with the shock rifle can be used to do the shock combos. Okay, so that gives us our light source that we want, or our color that will match the particle that we're going to do. So to do the particles, you can type in here manually if you know the name, but you also have to know the package that it's coming from. So you need the full qualified path to that particle effect. So one of the handy options that exist in the editor is you can copy the name of any object in the content browser to the clipboard, and it will copy exactly, formatted this string. So let's go ahead and open up or bounce back over to the editor. Okay, so here in the editor, you can, filter by the different object types or different tags. So we'll go ahead and filter by particle systems because that's what we're interested in right now. And under UDK game, we're going to find the weapons category. And you can see right now we're filtering by all weapons, so we can take this down one further level and go down to the shock rifles, since those are the ones we're interested in. So for our actual projectile, what we want to use is the shock rifle ball, which is this one right here. And so I'm going to right click on this, and you can see this option in the context menu, which is copy full name to clipboard. We're going to go ahead and select that, and then bounce back over to Visual Studio. So for our flight template, we're going to highlight this and paste over that. So the name that was copied to the clipboard was the full qualified name in terms of how Unreal structures the packages to the particle effect that we want, which is this right here. So this will now be the particle effect that will be used for the projectile itself. The next thing we need is the explosion. So again, we'll jump back over to the editor. And for this, we'll use the shock rifle ball impact. Same thing, copy name to clipboard. Okay. So just a couple of quick changes, but we already have what we need to give the visual variance for our new projectile. Another thing that we want to do is jump back over to the original rocket class, and let's go ahead and grab the explosion sound. Again, you can kind of pick and choose what of these you would want to override. Obviously you're going to be going for some consistency, but in this case, I think that we can get away with just picking a few of them. So what we're going to do is grab sound cues, go sounds, weapons. Okay, so here we have the shock rifle, And the one we're looking at is the combo explosion cube right here. So again, same thing, copy the full name to clipboard, jump back over. All right, so now we have our particle effect to be used during the travel, the flight time, the explosion, new light class to make sure that we're emitting the right tone of light, right hue for the particle effect we're using, and we have a unique explosion sound. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this and build. And did this on accident, but it's a good thing to show, is you'll notice that I'm going to get an error, which is telling me that the game is still running, so you have to shut down the editor before you can build scripts. So we'll go ahead and close down the editor and build. Okay, we're done building, so let's go ahead and fire up the editor again. Go ahead and load up the foliage map that we used. All right, here we go. And so you can see we still have our content factory right here, weapon factory. So we're just going to go ahead and run the map. And hopefully, if we've done everything correctly, we will see the changes and our new projectile. All right, so let's walk over to our pickup here. Everything looks the same. And now when we fire, we should see the different projectile. All right, perfect. So we've got the shock ball as expected. You notice see a rather large sound effect for the explosion that would normally be used in conjunction with the shock ball. All right, so everything is looking good, behaving just like the rocket launcher would. We have our new visuals for the particle effect. So there's a couple of things we want to change, including obviously bouncing off the walls, because we want to have this to be a ricochet style weapon. And there's also a few things we'll want to tweak. You'll notice that it's traveling at the same speed a rocket would, which is a little fast. Considering what we're going to be doing with the bouncing off the walls and stuff, a slower speed is a little bit better, both for visually and kind of from a gameplay standpoint. So we can switch that up in our new extended class. So let's bounce back over to Visual Studio. All right, so if we jump back over to the rocket class, which we extended from, we'll notice that with the exception of the post begin play function that's been overridden here, it's just a setting of the default properties. So in order to see what functionality exists in the projectile, and in our case the functions that we want to override, we need to look at projectile class. So with Visual Studio, if this is the first time using it, there's a few things that are good to know. Based on the context of what you're looking at, or kind of where the cursor is on the page, you have the class view here, and then you have the function and member variable view. So this is really helpful for kind of getting a snapshot glance at what what functions are available inside of the class. So the ones that we're looking for in particular are the process touch. Let's find out if that is here. So it is. So if we click on that, it'll jump us to the function right here. Okay, so this is one of the functions that is going to be called whenever your projectile comes in contact with anything. So in this case, it's looking to this internal member variable, provided it's greater than 0. It's going to call the explode function, which is essentially going to destroy your projectile, and also the explode function will do any things such as apply damage within a radius, depending on the other variables. And then the other thing here is that's going to be the radius damage. If in this case, it's also looking at the object that it came into contact with, which is passed in as other, and it's going to just apply damage to that a fixed value because it actually hit it. So in the case of what we're going to be doing, we're wanting it to ricochet, and so all we really care about is the direct damage, but we don't want it to detonate on contact. So if we copy this function and jump back over to our plasma rocket, and I'm just going to paste this in. Go ahead and format this up a bit. Okay, so really all that we really want to do, like I said, is just apply the damage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the else case and remove the damage applying. So we're going to basically convert the if case into other, which is the object passed in that we came into contact, is not equal to instigator. Okay, so basically we're saying as long as the object that came into collision with is not ourselves, then go ahead and apply the damage. But this way it won't hurt us. So there we have overridden the process touch function, which was already inherited through the extension of the rocket class, which was extended from the projectile class. So we just went and grabbed the process touch function, overrode it here locally, so now we get our own unique behavior. One thing when you're overriding functions, you have the option to call what is called the super. There's a keyword. So you can also call like super process touch and pass in the appropriate, basically you would just pass along the same parameters in general. And what that will do is if you're overriding the function, but you're basically kind of appending your own, or prepending or appending your own functionality or your own particular logic, then you can still call on the parent function if you don't want to rewrite all of the logic and have to do a bunch of work. Just copy and pasting. So for instance, if I was going to leave all of the code as it was when I pasted the function in, but just add one new line of logic or a couple of new lines, one option is to actually only add the new lines, remove everything else, and then just call the super where it's appropriate to do that functionality. But in this case, we are not wanting to do that because we overrode this intentionally so that the normal behavior of the projectile class version of this function, process touch, will not happen. So now what should happen if we were to run this would be that this basically would do nothing whenever it came into contact with the wall. So the next thing we're going to need to do is set it up to handle the bounce. Now there's another function that we want to override called hitWall. And so if we jump back to this here, and we're in the projectile class, if we look here and notice that hitWall does not show up, that's because hitWall is not specific to a projectile. So if we go back up to the top here, the UT projectile, and then we can kind of just trace it back up. Instead of going right to it, you could also do a find in files, but I'm just going to kind of trace back up the hierarchy of the extended classes here so that we can get an idea kind of what's happening. So you'll see here, still nothing. So then there's a base projectile class instead of the kind of project-specific UT and UDK ones. So now we're in the projectile class. This is a very large class, so it's taking a little bit of time here to load up. A lot of times when you get to the kind of the utmost base class of a particular object type, the classes will be rather large because there's a lot of functionality that they're supporting. So here we go. So notice that there is the hitWall function. Now this function is normally doing some heavier lifting stuff, like it's handling if there's dynamic objects that'll apply, make dynamic, so if you hit a physics object that's been basically in its sleep state or its default state, you can wake objects up and do that kind of stuff. We're going to grab this function, but we're not going to, or similar to what we did with the process touch, we're going to kind of remove and kind of override it to do specifically what we want it to do. So let's go ahead and grab this. We're going to jump all the way back over to our plasma rocket. Paste this in. Okay, so the singular we're no longer doing. Don't need that, and so because we're overriding this. So now we have to hit wall. We're going to leave all the parameters, of course, the same. We can get rid of this local variables. We also are not going to call the super because we do not want this to perform any of the previous actions. Basically, we're going to get rid of just about everything here and just write our own stuff. So what we want to do is we just basically want to change our direction. So if we take, I'm going to create or set our velocity, apologies, equal to, there's a function called, it does not show up in IntelliSense, but mirror vector by normal. And in that we are going to pass velocity. And we also need to pass in to this the hit normal, which you'll see was passed into this function hit wall. So this is the vector that represents the vector of angle, or the angle that the projectile collided with the wall at. All right, so now we're going to have our velocity, which is going to become the mirrored vector of the hit normal. So we'll go ahead and add our semicolon at the end there. And then the other thing we're going to do is set rotation. And there's a function we're going to call rotator. We're going to pass it our new velocity, which has been updated. Okay, so all right, so now we have our new velocity. We got the new velocity based off of the mirror vector by normal function, and then we use the set rotation function to apply that to our projectile. So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and change some more default properties. So we've got in theory, we've got it all set up now to collide with the wall and bounce off the wall by mirroring the vector, and then updating the new rotation based off that velocity, which we catch here. And then we've also overridden the process touch to no longer call the explode function on the projectile when it comes into collision with anything. And in this case, we're basically saying as long as whatever it has collided with is not us, then go ahead and just apply damage to it, or tell that object to take damage. So a few other things. As I mentioned earlier when we were looking at it in the map, the projectile moves right now at the speed that the default rocket launcher does, which is fine, but given the context of what we're doing, I think it's a little bit better to slow it down. So I'm just going to set the speed variable to 400. Now, whenever you're coming in to override variables, one thing you may want to do is obviously give yourself some context of what kind of the value range is. In this case, since we're deriving directly from the projectile rocket class, and this class is primarily a setting of all the default parameters, it's pretty easy to kind of trace back and find out what things we want to override. So you can see right here, the rocket launcher speed was substantially higher at 1350, and then we're setting ours to 400. And the other thing that I'm going to change is, you'll notice there is a draw scale variable. Actually, in this case, it doesn't use a draw scale. It's because the projectile is fine the way it is. But projectile class, further up the hierarchy, does have a draw scale variable. In fact, that comes all the way from the base object class. So what we're going to do is set this, and we're just going to scale up the particle just a bit. Not too much, just 1.2, 120%. Not super critical, but kind of makes it a little bit easier to spot, especially as it's bouncing around. All right, just quick recap. We've extended rocket to create our plasma rocket, overridden the process touch function to no longer essentially detonate the projectile on the first contact or collision that it makes. We've also told it when it comes into contact with an object, the hit wall function, which is what determines the normal and the object it hit. We're basically just grabbing, all we really care about in this case is the hit normal. But we do need these parameters around to match the definition of the function in the parent classes. So we mirror the vector and set that into velocity, and then we apply that velocity to our projectile. All right, so let's go ahead and save this. And we're going to build. Now I've already shut down the editor in the background. Just remember, if you're ever going to build, you need to close that down first, otherwise you will get an error. Okay, now that our build is completed, we'll go ahead and relaunch the editor. Okay, we'll go ahead and jump back into the foliage map, which is the one we've been working in. All right, here we go. So we don't really need to change anything with this factory. We're still just trying to spawn the new plasma rocket launcher. So we can actually just jump right into the plane editor option. And look around. So there's our rocket launcher. All right, so last time we had this, and we kind of, noted as basically it was just behaving like the rocket launcher would, but we had the new projectile. So now, if we've done everything correctly, we should see this bounce off the stone path here when I shoot it. All right, and you notice that it's moving substantially slower because we dropped that speed down to 400. All right, so Cool thing about this is not only is this map really great looking, but it also has a lot of interesting kind of pinball machine shapes, which is perfect for what we're doing with a ricochet type weapon. And you may find that this is too slow, and you would want to actually speed it up a little bit, but kind of adds to the sense of dread if you can see this thing bouncing around and kind of coming. It's also fun to watch it fly around the map. So in this case, another thing you'll notice is that we increase the draw scale to kind of make the projectile a little bit more readable, stand out. But you will see that it clips through things because of that, the collision that it's currently using. So you could go update the collision, because right now it's using whatever the collision is from the classes it's derived from. Or another option would be if you're not, feeling like right there, you can see that it did collide, but it also clipped a lot. So if you're not feeling that it really needs to be that big, then you could also just go in and modify that draw scale variable and even reduce it down below the 1.2, below 1 even, and take it down to smaller. There's other things you can do too. You'll notice that right now we are not doing any filtering based off of the type of object it collides with. So, you would expect it to collide with stone, but maybe you wouldn't expect it to collide with the foliage on the trees. But as you can see, it is. So, you can get in there and filter out certain things, but for our case, and just kind of showing how you can extend a class of a weapon, create your own weapon, and do some unique things with it. Okay, so back here in the editor. So basically, I'm just going to recap really quickly what we've kind of covered here. It's not too complicated, but it does touch a lot of different areas as far as the class extension, function overriding, and then also, even placing the object in the map if you're not used to the editor, haven't placed a lot of objects or opened up maps before, then just want to make sure that you kind of have a good grasp on everything that we've done. So this is the foliage map that comes with UDK November 2010. We adjusted our player start here, although that would not be required. And then we placed the weapon pickup factory, which you can get to by going to the content browser and then going to the actor classes tab. And then with the show categories filter on, then you're going to go to pickups, weapon, and UT weapon pickup factory. That's the object that we placed right here. And then we open up the properties, which you can get to by double clicking on the object itself or hit F4 with the object selected and highlighted. And our new class that we created, our new weapon, was the UT Web Plasma Rocket Launcher. It shows up in the list, and that's what we selected, and that's what was spawning in that we were picking up. Back over in Visual Studio, you can see that we had our new Plasma Rocket class here. All the other tabs that are open here were just pretty much the hierarchy of the class extension. We kind of traced our way back. So Plasma Rocket, derived from Rocket, Rocket derived, or extended projectile, Projectile, extended UDK projectile, and then we went all the way back to the default projectile class, which if we go to the top, you'll see that it actually just extends actor. So this is kind of where our true projectile starts as far as variables like speed, which we overrode. There's also a max speed and just going to be a lot of internal variables. The damage, that's another one that we could easily tweak to be different than the rocket launcher, especially given the fact that these can ricochet around. There's different ways you can handle it. Here's where you get to start being kind of, creative in designing how you want, in this case, the weapon to behave, because for instance, the damage value on a rocket launcher, everybody expects it to be a high damage, high impact weapon. And so what we've basically made is a bouncing rocket, but there's different ways you can handle it. Once you get in and start overriding the collision, you have the option to say, I want it to collide with walls and, static geometry and even havoc, rigid body actors, the K actors, but you may not want it to actually collide with pawns. You may want this to apply damage to them, but keep traveling, basically. It could be an instant hit kill. I mean, that would be super overpowered, but basically, if you're going to have something that could hit multiple people, like it could pass through 3 people in a row or something like that, then you may want to turn the damage back to sort of kind of keep a balance, because it's obviously a very powerful weapon. But basically, since you're in control of the collision, you're going to be the one in here. You can mess with how it handles when it processes a touch event. So you can add logic in here to filter by class type or by object type, essentially, and do that kind of stuff to where it behaves differently if it hits an actor or a pawn than if it hits a static wall. We've got the hit wall, what happens when it does make that collision. In our case, we're just bouncing right off of it, but you can do other things like you could place, actually, it probably would make more sense in the process touch. You could do decals here if you wanted to leave scorch marks on the static geometry. You could have decals, all kinds of good stuff that you can do. And in this case, it's just these two simple functions. This gives you what happens, physically to the projectile, and this is what happens sort of just in general. It's more generic, I guess you could say, since it's any touch event, which is any collision, be it something that would cause it to bounce and also something that would just pass through. Like, for instance, process touch goes as low as like the volumes, the trigger volumes and stuff that gets called if anything intersects the BSP planes that those trigger volumes create. There's no collision there, but it still is processing that stuff under the hood. And then, this is our biggest example of default properties, but if you look at other example classes or classes that we're extending from, this is a really, good way to see what variables are kind of in use here. It could be a bit overwhelming if you go all the way to the top, or I guess you said the lowest level base class. Say for projectile, there's a lot of stuff in here, although because it's commented, actually this class isn't too bad, but some of the classes can get really big and a little overwhelming as far as trying to figure out what all the variables do. So sometimes it's a good idea to take a look at one of the derived children classes and just kind of see what they're using and how they're using it. You get an idea of the range of values. For instance, momentum transfer. You're not going to have a very good idea what that number means, like what 1,000 means compared to, in this case, 85,000. But if you've played the game, Unreal Tournament, you have an idea what the rocket launcher is like and that, kind of rocket jump momentum transfer. So you can get an idea of the range and then make it a lot larger, a lot smaller, half it, whatever you want to do. Some things are pretty self-explanatory, like damage radius, damage, speed, those kinds of things. But just a good idea to get in and get comfortable with kind of where stuff is stored. And then you get some creative ideas for once you see something, you may not think too much about it, but you may see a variable that kind of triggers something in your head, like, oh, I'd like to do something with that. I have an idea for how I could manipulate that particular thing in my new weapon or my new object of some sort. And it doesn't always require you to write a lot of new supporting functionality. In the case of these variables, the functionality is more or less already there, depending on if you need to flex it or even change the way it works. But if what it does sort of out of the box, I guess you could say, is what you need it to do, but you can use it in interesting ways, then there you go. That's the power of UnrealScript. All right, so I'm going to open up the other projectile class. I'm sorry, the weapon class. Just real quick so we can see the final two classes that we created. So we created the weapon, which extended the rocket launcher content, because content was the class where it kind of set up all of the default properties. And we wanted to have to change as little as possible. So what we were able to do was just come in, exchange the projectile class that we're using, which is the new class that we created here. And then we just doubled the ammo count. So very simple, very easy. And here's where we handled our visual difference as well as the kind of the design of the weapon, so to speak, with the speed and the draw scale. Okay, so that's kind of a good overview of how you would create your own weapon. Of course, if you have new assets that you want to use, or if you've modeled your own weapons, and there's ways that you can import all of that stuff in. There's other examples of that provided by Epic and other resources. E3D has other things that you can look at for importing your assets in to the Unreal environment. And once you have all that stuff, you could build your own weapon from scratch. You could have your own model, your own animations on it, your own particle effects, whatever you want to do. So, all right. Hope you've had fun and enjoyed this DVD and this look at UnrealScript as a kind of an intro to how to program in UnrealScript and what you can do with it. And It'll be a fun playing around and learning new things.